Arsenal were just existing, seemingly only made to watch Manchester United's rampant success from a nice little vantage point. Then Arsene Wenger showed up and not only Arsenal but English football changed for the better.
This is a very special team managed by a very special man. They have done the double. They are Arsenal!
The first Premier League season went as much of the first decade would. Arsenal FC had the best defence in the division. It wasn't much to shout about in the inaugural season because they finished a garbage 10th position, but they were salvaged by their performances outside of the league. In Sheffield Wednesday, the Gunners found themselves a consolatory owl to shoot down in order to get some acclaim. In springtime Wembley wins over Wednesday, Arsenal became the first team to win both the FA Cup and the League Cup in the same season. 10th became a distant 4th, which became a shocking 12th, but the Arsenal could always clutch onto the fact that they were a decent cup team. And after broadening horizons after the Heysel disaster ban was over, that meant one thing: Europe was calling.
The trophy. David Sowman has his moment as well. My goodness, he deserves it.
Alright, it wasn't all good news, and by the summer of 1995 the club was an absolute mess that lurched from disgrace to disgrace. There was young English talent coming through fine enough to grace any team when Martin Keown returned to the club and Ray Parlour was busy graduating through the academy. But for every nugget of hope there was a share box full of despair. First, Tony Adams finally began to negotiate and publicise his alcohol addiction. Paul Merson's own vices followed. Arsenal's infamous Tuesday Club was unravelling at the seams, and not even the calm and collective George Graham was immune. The fact that he was collected was part of the problem. He collected a big old bung from an agent as part of player purchases, which was uncovered at the start of '95. Accepting gifts from agents was bad enough already, but when those gifts were handed to George Graham for facilitating the transfers of such acclaimed players like John Jensen and Pal Lyderson, it was made even worse. He couldn't go on as Arsenal manager, plus fan sentiment was wavering somewhat, with the club only 4 points off the drop as late as February. Added to that rot was another mid-table finish and a silver medal in the Cup Winners' Cup final, and it was abundantly clear that Arsenal had to change with the times. Chairman David Dein knew exactly the man to take the club into the new era of the Premier League that actually welcomed foreign imports and desired to play attractive football. The only problem was, he couldn't have him just yet. Arsene Wenger was born in Strasbourg and played to a below-average level professionally for his hometown club. He was, however, reared on a diet of Borussia Mönchengladbach, his favourite club, since he lived close to the French-German border. Gladbach being the most stylish European team of their day, Wenger's tactical roots can be found here. He finally achieved his managerial qualifications in 1981, first taking the Strasbourg reserves before getting Nancy relegated. However, he must have impressed somebody because Monaco came calling and, armed with money for the first time in his professional life, Wenger led the Principality club to a league title in his first season. His affiliation with French football wouldn't last despite a Coupe de France in 1991 and appearances in the 1992 Cup Winners' Cup final and semi-final of the Champions League 2 years later. Bernard Tapé's Marseille had left Wenger disillusioned with life in France, so he made the extreme move of becoming the manager of Nagoya Grampus 8 in a burgeoning J-League in Japan. There he'd meet Boro Primorac, a fellow exile disgruntled by the state of French football, and he would become his long-term number 2. His next move had been telegraphed even before he fell out of love for French football. The year was 1989. Arsene Wenger found himself with a stop between a scouting mission in Istanbul and home. He found himself in London, so naturally scoped out a local game, and that fixture just so happened to be a North London derby where Arsenal would be victorious. A chance meeting that night led to a lifetime friendship when Arsenal chair David Dein hit it off with Wenger. Arsenal and Wenger passed like ships in the night as Bruce Rioch was hired as club manager in 1995, just a week before the Frenchman became available. Nonetheless, Dean still had a struggle to sell Wenger to the rest of the board at Highbury. Appointing a foreign manager was still taboo, what with the failings of Joseph Venglos at Aston Villa and Ossie Ardiles in a managerial capacity at Spurs. The boardroom rebuffed him for suggesting Wenger as a direct George Graham successor, and by the time Rioch was appointed, the Frenchman was wedded to a contract in Japan. However, it was only a matter of time before Wenger and Arsenal were intertwined, especially once Rioch alienated key Arsenal players. Even in spite of a late home turnaround on the final day against Bolton, which secured 5th, and with it, UEFA Cup football, Rioch was sacked. The press had a field day with rumours swirling about a potential replacement. Naturally, they went down the sensationalist route, putting forward the names of Barcelona's Johan Cruyff and recent European Championship semi-finalist Terry Venables. So, when Arsene Wenger was announced on August 20th to be taking up the dugout 6 weeks later, the national press recoiled with "Arsene who?" and so the onslaught began. If it wasn't salacious rumours in the tabloid, it was his rival managers telling him to keep his opinions to Japanese football. This was good. It meant that Arsene Wenger had gotten under the skin of English football. To go to the next level, he had to provide the antidote for English football, and that meant changing the culture at Highbury. Out went the Stella Artois by the bucket load and Mars bars on the back of the bus. In came the creatine vitamins and massages. Out went a pre-match meal of egg, chips and beans with ketchup. In was the pre-match meals of boiled chicken, green vegetables and pasta. Out, jam as a snack. In, diabetic jam as a snack. The revolution could not be stopped. Yoga was here, militarised training sessions performed to the millisecond joined them. Stretching was now a non-negotiable and was now actually meaningful. Some players went with the times, some didn't. Enough changed though, so Arsenal did as a result. There was a head start. First off, in signing players like Dennis Bergkamp and David Platt from Italy, a level of professionalism was creeping into the club before his own recommendations in Patrick Vieira and Remy Gard were acquired. Then, with the suffering of Paul Merson and Tony Adams through their numerous vices was made public and the pair entered rehab, the club was in a far healthier position on the other side. And now I'm not suggesting Arsene Wenger is an arsonist, but months into his time at the club, the training facilities they shared with a local university, which he absolutely hated by the way, miraculously caught fire and left the club in need of a brand new training base. It was arguably the best thing to happen to the club. Arsenal had enough money, Wenger had the need to micromanage the club to within an inch of their lives, and that marriage only made the manager more comfortable, as did a half-arsed tilt at the Premier League title which promised a return to Europe and much more beyond it. Wenger had achieved buy-in from his players and the club's best finish since 1991. Now, they aimed for real success. Arsene Wenger hadn't officially taken to the dugout before he got to work in changing the club forever. Arsenal were midway through a UEFA Cup first round contest away to Borussia Mönchengladbach, and they were drawing 1-1 but 4-3 down on aggregate. They needed 2 goals to progress, and Wenger marched down from the stands and into the away dressing room to give them the acumen to progress. He told them to ditch the 3-5-2 and go with a 4-man backline.
Juskowiak macht das Tor! Effenberg, Tor! Juskowiak, Tor!
Alright, so that failed, and so too did Wenger's plans to implement the 4-man defence upon his official arrival at the club. The Frenchman waited and waited, sitting idly by as the players, fond and comfortable with the 3-5-2, finished third and trophyless in 1997. On the first day of pre-season ahead of the 97-98 campaign, he had some news for the players. The 4-4-2 was in, or rather the 4-4-1-1, with the kingpin being Dennis Bergkamp, who would operate behind Ian Wright. Manchester United had been rampantly successful, with Eric Cantona performing in the number 10, operating between the two rigid banks of English 4. Now that he was retired, the Premier League needed a new French genius. Completing the team and allowing for this formation change to work was Emmanuel Petit and Marc Overmars. Petit would hold the midfield fort with Vieira, whilst Overmars would blitz forward down the left. Meanwhile, Nicolas Anelka would come into his own up front, signed as a fresh-faced 17-year-old from PSG in February, only now was it time for the 1997-98 season. The optimism of the new season was immediately chipped away ever so slightly as Ian Wright's opener at Elland Road was instantly equalised by Jimmy Floyd Hasselbank. A truce of a draw was combated with Arsenal's return to Highbury and perhaps the most comfortable start to a home season ever. Goal in the first half, goal in the second half, 2-0 win, Coventry vanquished. Now the season could start. The Dell next, a tricky place at the best of times, and Mark Overmars got his name on the Arsenal score sheet for the very first time, initiating a 3-1 win before August ended with 2 draws. But it would be downright rude of me not to show the goals in their fullest, I'm allowed, of the Gunners' strikes at Filbert Street in the first of those draws.
Bergkamp! It's opened up for him, off the goalkeeper and in. Still life in the game according to the referee, and Bergkamp certainly life in him.
Those goals would keep people who call themselves content creators ticking for generations to come, given the unique fact that Dennis Bergkamp was named as first, second and third in BBC's Goal of the Month competition. The subsequent goalless draw in the North London derby would be less celebrated, both in August 97 and now. 2 weeks later there was a personal triumph at Highbury when Ian Wright obliterated Cliff Bastin's goal-scoring record for the Arsenal. Good job that he bagged himself a hat-trick because he suffered a bit of premature celebration in whipping the top off as if to announce his record-breaking traits. Nonetheless, it was a 4-1 battering over Bolton Wanderers whose sole job was to yo-yo between the top 2 tiers of English football. The result spurred Arsenal on for more. Nigel Winterburn's stunning winner at Chelsea followed 8 days later before another London derby proved profitable in a 4-0 humbling of West Ham. Now, the season could start. Then came just one win in 4, and that one win was one of the more predictable results in Premier League history. Arsenal 5, one-time Premier League team Barnsley 0. Surrounding that little island was a rampant, voluminous sewage of draws. Everton pegged back the Gunners from 2 down at Goodison before not a single goal was scored at Selhurst Park against Crystal Palace, nor at home to Aston Villa. It left Arsenal second in the shake-up, 4 points behind the Hurley pace-setters of Manchester United. But there was the enormous clash between the two on the precipice at Highbury. It would be an instant classic.
Anelka. Oh, what a goal! Ahead to it. Vieira. Oh! It flew in!
That should have been a springboard, but then Arsenal collapsed, losing in quick succession to Sheffield Wednesday, Liverpool and Blackburn. A rare chance to pick up a victory before Christmas was scuppered by an act of God. Floodlight failure away to Wimbledon, which left Arsenal way back in 6th and a staggering 13 back on the incessant champions Manchester United. The title was officially gone, or rather it was supposed to be. 4 losses in 43 days prompted a night of soul-searching amongst the Arsenal ranks, and it changed the club. The back 5 defensive unit told Emmanuel Petit and Patrick Vieira in no uncertain terms that they weren't doing their jobs properly. Consequently, the Frenchmen changed up their entire game in midfield, and the results followed.
Wright still running, and Ian Wright! Overmars in again! Bergkamp caught Southampton's back line out. Well, it's misjudged that, and Overmars has read it splendidly. Adams, and Stephen Hughes has got another one. This is Grimaldi. Oh, the goal!
And still Arsenal had 12 points to make up, but had grown an extra game in hand. That was pissed away quite successfully with a goalless draw at Upton Park. 12 matches remained, 11 points was the deficit, and even with 2 games in hand, a trip to Old Trafford on March 14th looked increasingly daunting. Arsenal crowbarred in a classic 1-0 to the Arsenal, winning the rescheduled Wimbledon trip. In the meantime, however, Manchester United were busily wobbling like it was rice bowl downhill on Takeshi's Castle. Dropped points at Hillsborough and Upton Park, Arsenal's fate was suddenly in their own hands. 9 points behind but 3 games in hand, Old Trafford suddenly became a bit of a title decider.
They're gone. Bergkamp and then Anelka gets in and gets it home.
And now we were talking, especially once 1-0 to the Arsenal wins returned against Sheffield Wednesday and Bolton Wanderers. Alex Ferguson, ironically enough, was questioning Arsenal's bottle now they were effectively ahead. But the Gunners had other plans for the beginning of April as United chucked in a crunch league game at home to Liverpool. The FA Cup was back and Arsenal were away to Villa Park. First Division Wolves were the opponents, and surely this semi-final wouldn't be a battle like their FA Cup run had been so far.
Well, he has to score. Oh! Arsenal are through. To start here, and here's Overmars with an early chance, and it's come on through for Nicholas Anelka. Off the post and in! To keep the shootout going, to keep West Ham in the FA Cup. They're out! Then Christopher Wray's in, and what a run he's on!
With the cup final booked, the league in their hands, there was a dash of 1971 about it, but there had been the chance for glory that had never been achieved yet. Unfortunately, the League Cup blew up in the Gunners' faces when Patrick Vieira was sent off at Stamford Bridge in a semi-final second leg. Moments later, Roberto Di Matteo and Dan Petrescu frittered away Arsenal's chance at a domestic treble. But forget that, there was a first league title to be won in 7 years and Arsenal were looking unstoppable. The pretenders of Newcastle and Blackburn were consigned to the past, swatted aside comfortably by Wenger's Gunners before a third consecutive rout was confirmed at home to Wimbledon 5-0. All the while, United couldn't put away Newcastle the very same day, which meant for the first time since October, the Gunners led the table. Now it was a matter of time, and they weren't about to let up that advantage, as Barnsley and Derby County found out. Therefore, a crowning was pencilled in for Highbury, where Everton were led out like lambs to the slaughter. There was only one winner, and perhaps only one man to sum it all up.
Put through by Steve Ball, would you believe it?
13 days was left until the showpiece event of the season, giving Arsenal time to lap it all up, chucking in away matches at Anfield and Villa Park to allow the history books to pen a tiny 1-point gap for perpetuity. But forget all that noise, Arsenal were booked in for a cup final and the potentially dangerous Newcastle, comfortably the most dangerous team they'd faced on the road to Wembley, and let's not forget that this wonderful Arsenal team had been taken to penalties at Port Vale and West Ham.
Overmars, he's past Pistoni! And Arsenal have taken the lead! There's no flag, and it's Anelka! No catching him. Maybe no catching Arsenal now.
And officially, after that incredibly one-sided cup final, Arsenal were back. The defence seemed hungry, as though 5 years had been added onto their careers. The midfield was equal parts technical and combative, while speed up front was provided by Overmars down the left and Anelka centrally, who more than made up for Ian Wright's elongated injury. Meanwhile, Bergkamp's creativity knitted the side together. It was a nirvana the Premier League had yet to see. The possibilities going into the 21st century was mouth-watering. The Premier League was changed forever. Sure, the influx of foreign talent had picked up some pace after the 1994 World Cup as English clubs returned to Europe, got a bit of money under their belt and bolstered their reputation, but this was a full-on sea change. Manchester United and Alex Ferguson had had their contenders beforehand. Norwich City and Aston Villa made some half-baked attempt in winning their first edition of the Premier League in '93. Then Blackburn actually did so 2 years later. Then it was the turn of Newcastle United, who were deemed to be entertaining under Kevin Keegan. All the while, the household names of Leeds, Everton, Chelsea and Liverpool, as well as Spurs, failed to cope. They were all pretenders, just like Arsenal were, until 1997. Manchester United had won 4 of the first 5 Premier League titles. Now, after Arsenal's double, Arsene Wenger was the first true opposition to the Alex Ferguson tidal wave of success that threatened to sweep through English football unabated. Wenger knew what he had to change and was prescient enough to stay clear of the things he didn't need to change. For example, Arsenal had the best defensive record in 2 of the first 4 Premier League seasons before Wenger joined. The 5-man backline of Sowman, Winterburn, Dixon, Bold and Adams that had been so successful under George Graham would not be tampered with because it was still getting results. Wenger's job was to add some physicality into the midfield, which through Petit and Vieira he more than achieved. His job was to add goals up front, and through Anelka, Bergkamp and Overmars he achieved that as well. Wenger knew the game was becoming more technical, more continental, and he just hurried that process along for the English game. And for as much as he is viewed as this all-conquering, invading, transformative effect off the pitch, Wenger understood what was required tactically on the pitch for Arsenal to be successful again. The prevailing force was Manchester United, who used a 4-4-1-1 with Eric Cantona in the number 10 or shadow striker role. Meanwhile, before Wenger arrived, Arsenal were operating Dennis Bergkamp in an incompatible 3-5-2. The biggest shift on the turf was moving Bergkamp behind a quick striker of the ilk of an Ian Wright or a Nicola Anelka, and in that 4-4-1-1 that the players resisted for a season, Wenger struck a goldmine. The foundation was set, the players were healthier and hungrier, they had tactics befitting a league champion, now they were favourites to do it all again, to win the double-double in the Millennium's final year. Ferguson's Man United had done so, but they'd never done it in successive years. That pipe dream though would fall flat on its arse as United famously roared back in '99, but Arsenal would have their double-double, they'd just be made to wait for it a little longer. But for now, you can skip to the end, to the Invincibles of '04, an achievement Arsene Wenger has that Sir Alex Ferguson cannot boast.